Alright, we're going to change the brake pads on a 2011 Ninja 250. If you look in at the pads here, it's kind of hard to see, but the left pad has a lot of meat on it. But the right pad, you can see it's pretty close to the backing plate. And it's important to understand that if it gets close on one side, go ahead and change both pads. And also, you see it looks like we have some padding left, but it's also important to understand that sometimes the pads wear unevenly. So on this side you have some padding left, but on the front part of it, towards the front of the bike, you might not have any padding, so be aware of that. So the first thing we're going to do is loosen the brake pad retaining pins. And if you try to fit a hex extension to do that, you'll see that the exhaust pipe is in the way. So what we're going to have to do is use one of these tools here. And this is 5mm, I believe. We're going to fit it in there. It's kind of hard to see. That's 5mm. And I have one of these tools that I don't really use anymore, and I use that as a breaker bar. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen that, and we're just going to break it free. You don't want to remove the pins yet. So now we're going to go to the pin towards the front of the bike. I've got that in there. And again, I'm going to try to use it without the breaker bar. As you can see, it's kind of hard without the breaker bar. Maybe I'm just a weakling. There we go. So the pins are now released, and we're going to remove the caliper mounting bolts. But we got a problem. Exhaust pipe. This is about the worst position you can imagine for the exhaust pipe when it comes to doing anything on that caliper. So what we're going to have to do is use, I believe this is a 6mm extension. There's probably more than one way to do this, but that's the way I've been using. So we're going to fit it in there. And you might have to kind of work it under the brake line. So we got that loose. I'm going to get the other one loose. As you can see, it's just barely fitting under the exhaust pipe. So we got that loose. Might be kind of hard to get these bolts out because they kind of have a tendency to get caught on the brake line or pushed up against the brake line. I'm going to move that brake line up. Hopefully this will come right out. There's your mounting bolt. And I have something that's kind of a neato tool. It's a magnet. Maybe some of you have seen these. You don't have to use this, but that's kind of neat just to put your hardware there. Alright, so now we have the other mounting bolt. And again, you might want to lift up the brake line just so it clears out of there. And there you go. Alright, so now that's going to allow us to go ahead and move up the caliper. And it's going to be kind of hard to move it loose because the pads are up against the brake disc. But you can just work it out, and there you go. Okay, now I don't know if you have enough light, but you see this pad had some padding there, but then look what happens when you go to the rear of the bike, or the front of the bike. It's barely got any padding left because they're wearing unevenly. I've tried a lot to, I've dismantled the entire caliper, I've lubricated everything, cleaned everything. It's very difficult to get these pads to wear evenly because one of the pistons usually comes out easier than the other one. If anybody has any suggestions about how to remedy that, let me know, because it seems like a pretty difficult problem. Okay, just be aware. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and take the pins out. So here's your pins. I think they're already past the threading, so you might have to kind of help it. Might have to almost pull it out, so to speak. Now, I didn't mention, if you don't break these pins free, it's very difficult to hold the caliper in your hand when you're trying to loosen the pins. And you don't want to put this in a vise because it'll damage the caliper. The caliper's aluminum. See how I'm kind of pulling the pins out? They're already past the thread, so they just kind of have a tendency to stick in there. You might want to put your thumb over the brake pads because there's a spring that will launch them up a little bit. So again, I'm kind of having to pull these out. So there's one. Here's two. Okay, now we can take off this pad. That's the one that was pretty worn. You can see it's more worn down here than here. Hopefully you can see that. The lighting might not be so great. All right, and this hook here, whatever you want to call that, goes up against this rod. It's also important to understand this side is different. This pair is the same on the front caliper and the rear caliper, so you can put these pads on either side, but this one that goes up against the pistons is different. Also, there's a lot of padding on this side, right? Not much on that side, so just be aware of that. This whole bracket comes completely off. If you want to clean these shafts, you can take that rubber off. You can clean under there with some grease. I use silicone grease, but make sure you use the right grease. I don't think we really have a need to take that off. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and take that off because it's going to be easier for you to see. So you don't have to take this off, but don't make it easier to work with the caliper. Make sure these rubber boots are in good condition. There's no rips or anything. Okay, and there's a spring down in there. We'll mess with that spring later on. That spring can actually come out. So at this point, we're going to put the new pads in, but we can't do that because we have to push the pistons in first. The pads have a lot more meat on them, so they need more room to fit in there. So we need to push these pistons back in. But the problem is the pistons are dirty. You don't want to push these pistons back in with all that dirt because it might go through the dust seals and the the fluid seals. So the best tool to use, or one of the tools you can use, is a toothbrush. And toothbrushes are designed to get into hard to reach places, so that's pretty much the perfect tool. You can see they're turning gold. That's the color of the pistons. And the difficult part is the part of the piston under, but if you just work that that toothbrush down there, you can get under the piston. It's no big deal. If you want to, you can try to rotate the pistons, but be aware the pistons don't usually rotate very easily, at least not on my bike. You can use pliers, but you want to use a rag, and there's always a danger you could you know, scratch the pistons. You could use soft jaw pliers, but just be aware, even with soft jaw pliers, it's going to be difficult to rotate those pistons. So if I were you, I would just use a brush, toothbrush, whatever you want to use to get under there, and it's going to be fine. That'll be enough to get those pistons clean. And if you want to, just to be sure that you got the pistons completely clean, you can push the brake pedal and watch what happens to the pistons. See that? Pistons are actually coming out a little bit, and if I hold this one down, it's kind of hard to hold, but it's darn near impossible actually. If I hold that piston, the other one will come out, so that'll allow you to be a little more thorough when it comes to your cleaning, just to be sure you got everything. You don't want to push too much, or else the pistons will actually fall out. So be careful about that. Okay, so that's probably clean enough. You can clean these as much as you want to. Okay, so at this point, we're going to push the pistons back in. Again, we don't have enough room for the new brake pads. Here's a new brake pad. See how thick that is? There's no way that that's going to fit inside there. So we're going to push the pistons in. But at this point, I need to explain something that's kind of important. When you push these pistons in, you need to keep track of the fluid level inside that reservoir. Now, if I push these pistons back to where they were, you can see that the level is about at the low line. Wow, that's hard to push those things back in. But anyway, it's about, you can see the level's about at the low line there. And you might think to yourself, well, that's not good. You don't have enough brake fluid. But actually, that's normal. You see, when you have new brake fluid, well, first of all, you put your brake pads in, your brand new brake pads at the factory. Then you put brake fluid all the way up to the upper line. Now you ride the bike, and as time goes by, the brake pads wear down. But as your brake pads wear down, these pistons have to go farther out because there's less padding, so they're just going to keep coming out farther and farther. As the pistons go out, this level goes down. So when this level goes all the way down to the low line, that means you need to change your brake pads, and that's how it's supposed to work. You go to the low level line after riding, you put your new brake pads in, you push your pistons back in, and guess what happens? The level goes right up to where it was before, at the upper level. That's the way it's supposed to work. Here's the problem. Some guy comes along and the brake pads need to be replaced, but he doesn't look at the brake pads. He sees that the reservoir is a little low. So he puts in more brake fluid into the reservoir, but now when you go to change the brake pads and put new pads in, and you push those pistons in, guess what's going to happen? There's too much brake fluid in the system, and now it's going to pressurize this reservoir. And if you're not paying attention to the reservoir, you're just putting in new brake pads, you're not going to even notice that this is too full. So you go to put your caliper on the bike, and the system is pressurized, and it's going to cause your wheel to bind. It's going to cause the pads to be up against the brake disc with too much force, and it's actually going to cause your wheels to bind, and that's a dangerous situation. So the moral of the story is when you push these pistons back in, you want to keep track of that level in the reservoir and make sure that there's not too much brake fluid. If there's too much brake fluid, just take this cap off, get a paper towel, soak up some of it. And but the important thing is when you push these pistons back in, put the caliper back on the bike with the new pads, you want this level to be at the upper line. So now let's go ahead and push those pistons back in. Very, very difficult to push these pistons in. Maybe I'm just a weakling, but this is not easy. Just want to push those in as far as you can. That's what happens to your thumbs when you try to do this. All right, so just keep pushing. You can get a rag if you want to. When you push one piston in, the other one has a tendency to come out, so just be aware of that. Now, I didn't mention, when you push these pistons in, you want to use two thumbs. Don't just use one, because it might cause the piston to wear more on one side, or the seal that is. All right, that one's almost all the way in. You probably don't have to go all the way in, but mostly in. Now we're going to stop, and we're going to look at that reservoir. What do you notice about that reservoir? The level is back at the upper line. That's exactly where it's supposed to be. So, moral of the story, you don't need to change the brake fluid. Don't add brake fluid. Don't subtract brake fluid. All you have to do is change your brake pads if you didn't have somebody come and pour in extra brake fluid. So if you're the only one working on the bike, you know, the point is you want to do these things separately. But if you're worried that somebody may have poured some brake fluid in here, which is always a possibility, keep an eye on that level. So now the level is exactly where it's supposed to be, and we're ready to put in our brake pads. Now I'm just going to keep that spring inside there. There's no need to take it off. Hopefully you can see the orientation. Don't put that spring in backwards. You see the way it is now? That's the way it came when I bought the bike. So I was the first one to mess with the brakes on this motorcycle, so I'm pretty confident that's the right orientation. So here we go. You're going to put in this pad first. Now, I forgot to mention, these are Volair brake pads. Somebody told me that these are Chinese brake pads. I haven't done any research on that to confirm, but I wouldn't be surprised because these pads cost about $6 per pair. You can get them on the internet, whereas American brake pads cost between $30 and $40 per pair. Now, some people say that the pads on these will actually come off the backing plate. Now, I don't know if that's actually true, but I can tell you that this is about the 6th pair of Volair brake pads that I've used, and I haven't had that problem. So I'm not giving you a recommendation. You know, it's up to you. Do you want to pay $6 per pair or $35 per pair? Obviously, if the pads came off the backing plate, that would be a disaster, so it's your decision. It's been a while since I bought Volair brake pads because about 5 or 6 years ago, I bought them in bulk and stocked up. But recently, I tried to find Volair brake pads on Amazon and eBay, and I couldn't find any. You can still find brake pads that are about $6, $7 a pair, and they're probably made by the same people. Again, it's up to you if you want to go with these brake pads. Also, I want to note that I use Chinese brake discs also. It takes about a month for them to come because they're coming from China, but American discs will cost about $250. So again, do you want to pay $50 for a brake disc or $250 for a brake disc? The only complaint that I have with these Chinese pads and Chinese brake discs is that the brake discs tend to wear pretty quickly. In fact, I have to replace brake discs once every year. Now, you might say, well, that's because it's a Chinese product. But the issue I have with that logic is that the OEM brake disc wore down just as quickly. So, again, I'm not giving you a recommendation. I'm just telling you that this is my experience. That goes up against the pistons, and maybe if we're lucky, we can go ahead and put a pin in. Now, when you put these pins in, you're going to want to push the pad down a little bit, but the problem is when you do that, the spring may have a tendency to flip up. So we'll see how this goes. I'm going to put, see my pin, I'm putting my pin inside there, my brake pad retaining pin. And I don't know if you can see, but there's a little hole. You see this hole, you want to watch the pin to make sure it goes in that hole. And there it is, it's right in that hole. That was easy. And so now we get the other one. Again, keep an eye on that hole. And there we are. Now, the spring is actually starting to pop up, so I'm going to put in the other pad. Actually, before we do that, we need to put this bracket back in. It's very difficult to put this in the wrong way, so you don't really need to worry too much about putting in the wrong orientation. There's only one way it can really go. You want to put that in all the way. It's not going to go in easily. Well, maybe it will. Sometimes they get stuck. Okay, so you see this shaft here. That's what this hook thing is going to go on. Again, very difficult to put these in the wrong way. And so now we're going to try to get those pins through those holes, and you can see those holes. You're going to have to push the pad down a little bit, and there I am, I'm right through. So now we're going to put the other, look for the other hole, push the pad down a little bit. And it looks like we're through. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get my bit here, and we're gonna, it's just starting the thread there. The threads go from here to here, so it's just starting. Now you don't have to force it, it should go right in there. threads are starting here. And there's no torque value for these pins given in the service manual. So I'm going to show you how to snug it up later on. Those pins are in there all the way. Now at this point, you might want to just verify that the pins are completely through. Obviously they're all the way through, but you want to make sure that they went in the hole, so you can push that pad back and you can see it went through the holes there, and there. So this pad is connected, and you can push this pad over like that and you can see those pins. It's kind of hard to see the one on the right, but you get the point. And there you go. It's that simple. Just make sure that that spring doesn't get cocked the wrong way or something. So now we're ready to go ahead and install the caliper on the bike. Make sure you don't twist the brake line. There we go. Okay, so we're going to worry about torquing the retaining pins later on, and you want to line up this that bracket that was on the caliper. That's what has the holes on it. So we're going to line those holes up with the mounting bracket. Now we can get our bolts. Again, you might want to move the brake pad or the brake line up a little bit. It's very difficult to get these in. Have patience and just work with it. Okay, so I think that bolt is all the way in. That was fairly easy. Now we're going to take the second bolt. Again, lift up the brake line a little bit, and you can just kind of move the caliper, kind of pivot it back and forth until you feel the bolt go in. So the bolt is not going in, so I'm just going to kind of try to eyeball it, see where that is. Like I said, this can be kind of a pain getting it lined up. Going in now. Again, it's not easy to get those in. Now at this point, you might want to verify that the bolts are in. You can rotate this wheel, and as you rotate it, you'll see openings where you can actually see the back of the bolts. So I don't know if you'll be able to see. Somewhere in there, see that? I believe that's the back of the bolt. So if you're kind of worried you didn't get it in right, there you go. If you rotate it a little more, you might be able to see the other bolt. So now 18 foot-pounds. So I'm going to use something kind of different. My brother, he uses this fancy dancy Mac Tools digital torque wrench, and if you have the money, I'd highly recommend a digital torque wrench because these are much easier to use. But don't ask how much these things cost. 18 foot-pounds. All right. I'm going to get my 6mm. You're going to have to angle the torque wrench because again it's not going to be easy. The exhaust pipe's in the way. See how easy that is? Digital torque wrench. Alright, this is the harder one. Yeah, it's very difficult to get in here with the exhaust pipe. So the brake caliper is now mounted. Now don't forget, we have not tightened those pins yet. So I'm going to get my 5mm, and before you tighten these pins, realize that this is an aluminum caliper. If you tighten these too much, you could destroy the caliper. Do not over tighten these. All right? It just takes a little bit of snug. In fact, I'm not even going to use the breaker bar or the cheater bar. There we go. That's it. Those things are probably not going to come out. I'll get the second one. That's it. Do not manhandle those things. So at this point, a lot of people will get on their bike, take off, they would apply the rear brake, and they would slam right into a wall. The rear brake is not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because those pads are not up against that disc. You need to go to your pedal and you need to pump the pedal. Now watch what happens. It went all the way to the floor. That's when you crash into the wall and you kill yourself. All right, so you got to pump it. And as you pump it, it's going to get firm because now the pads are up against the disc. Now, one thing I want to mention is that whenever you do anything that could affect the wheel, whether it's adjusting the chain slack or messing with the caliper, you want to make sure that the wheel is rotating freely. So because we've put new brake pads on, I'm going to go to the brake lever and I'm going to push down pretty hard. And then I'm going to make sure that the wheel is rotating freely. You always want to do this whenever you work on a wheel. Now, it's important to understand that on the Ninja 250, the front wheel is going to rotate. It should rotate pretty freely if everything's working properly. But be aware that the rear wheel has not only drag from the brake pads, but it has drag from the chain, so it's not going to rotate as easily as the front wheel. But this wheel now, it's not rotating all that great, and that probably has something to do with the pads wearing unevenly. It may have something to do with my bike being knocked over 19 times. Maybe something got warped. But as I ride the bike, it'll probably settle in. Now, if you rotate the wheel and it just stops immediately, and it's hard to rotate it, then you might want to take it to a mechanic and have them look at it or something, because then you might have a problem. But there's not really much I can do with this. I mean, it's not binding really badly, but it's you know, it'll just settle in as I ride the bike. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to get on your motorcycle, you're going to start using your brakes, and you're going to think, wow, these brakes are horrible. And the reason it's going to feel that way is because they're new brake pads. There are grooves in this disc. There's all kinds of imperfections and whatnot and so on and so forth. And those pads are not conformed to those imperfections, which means that the surface area that the pads are going to be touching on the disc is probably less than 50% of what it's supposed to be. So if you get on your bike and your pads don't work very well, that's normal. What you're going to want to do is called bedding in the brakes. And sometimes manufacturers will actually have directions on the packaging about how to do this. I would suggest getting on the freeway, go 65 miles per hour, and just touch the brakes slightly, and just let the brakes kind of, drag. Pick up some more speed, do the same thing. Pick up some more speed, do the same thing. And what that's going to do is it's going to cut into that padding to where the padding molds to the disc. At that point, the braking power is going to be maximized. But whatever you do, pay attention to the road. If you're not comfortable bedding in the brakes, then just forget about it. You can just do it, let it happen on its own. But if you want to get the brakes at maximum power as quickly as possible, you want to bed in those brakes. You can do it on street, surface roads also, but it might take longer because you're going at slower speeds. Now, at this point, we've pumped the brakes. This level should be at the upper level there. But as you can see, it's a little bit lower than that. So I might add some brake fluid to where it gets to the top. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and top off the reservoir. So because I'm putting brand new brake pads in, I might as well top it off to the upper level. Again, when you have your new brake pads in, you want this level to be at the upper line. So in order to do that, we're going to remove this Phillips screw. And sorry about the lighting in here. It's kind of bad lighting. It's kind of hard to see in here. But this bracket comes off. With that Phillips. And now it's very important to hold the reservoir as you unscrew the cap. And you might want to have a rag under the reservoir if any fluid drips. That's standard procedure. And now we're just going to top off that reservoir. So we're just about there. You may have to use a funnel. So it looks like that's going to be good. So I just wanted to show you how to add fluid to the reservoir. You don't want to leave this reservoir cap off for very long. This suction rubber here, it kind of stayed inside the cap, so I'm just going to put the cap back on with that rubber already in place. And be very careful. Make sure that the reservoir screws on properly. And I think the service manual says to move about 1/6 of a turn or something like that. So there you go, that's plenty. And of course we're gonna put the bracket back on with the Phillips screw. So make sure that bracket's in place. And there you go. And just a note about changing brake fluid. If you ever need to change your brake fluid, if I were going to change the brake fluid and the brake level or the fluid level was there, when I put new brake fluid in, I would want the level to go at that exact same spot. I don't want it to go to the upper line because it's there. That means that the pads have worn down, hypothetically. So when I put new fluid in, I want to mark that point and add fluid just to where it gets to that point. I don't want to add it to the top line, because that means when you change your brake pads, you're going to have to worry about this reservoir pressurizing. The level is going to go way above. That's just a note on changing brake fluid. So that was how to change brake pads on a 2011 Ninja 250. I'll see you on the next one.